welcome to this episode of the Skiff Meetings podcast featuring Robyn Duda. Robyn is an event strategist, an experienced designer, and a thought leader who knows a thing or two about thinking differently and creating bold change. She was an executive at UBM, now Informa, and she's taught courses at college and was also an advisor to the Metaverse company. But really what we're talking with her about in this episode is the event that she co-founded just recently called RacquetX, an event for the racket sport ecosystem. RacquetX was founded over a year ago with Marco Ghiberti after validating the business idea and securing initial funding. And the event itself is about inclusivity when it connects various racket sports. It took place concurrently with the Miami Open, featuring joint ticket arrangements, and there was a lot of business-to-business and consumer segments as part of the event, including conference sessions and product exhibitions. Now, the launch relied on strategic partnerships with modern marketing tactics in between, and it really ultimately relied on personal connections to promote the event, and that's really what made the event a success. And in the podcast, we dive into some of the learnings that Robyn had in terms of the flexible approach that's needed really to meet the needs of sponsors and attendees. I hope you enjoy this podcast, this conversation, and I hope you check out the other episodes of the Skiff Meetings podcast, which are available on all major platforms. Thank you very much for listening. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this edition of the Skiff Meetings podcast. I am delighted to be joined by our guest today, which is none other than Robyn Duda, the co-founder and CEO of RacquetX. Robyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Robyn, we've heard a little bit. I think a lot of people might be familiar with you and what you're doing right now, but I'd love you to tell your story about, maybe quickly about the your adventure in events and where that started. And I'm particularly interested in starting with that first contact with business events, particularly. Where did you first sort of realize they were a thing? And then take us through to today, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, it starts just like one step before business, two steps before business events. I feel like I planned events my whole life. I had some killer birthday parties as a teenager and grade schooler. But I went to college to play basketball, quit very soon after, even though I had a scholarship. So that was a whole ordeal in itself. But I was exposed to the school was putting on or gave like a $20,000 budget to a handful of students to plan a big black tie gala. And it was like a People's Choice Awards for school. I went to a small school. And I was like, let's try this. And I fell in love. So it was that moment that I knew I wanted to be in the event industry. I went to a small liberal arts school, and this is what's relevant to the story. And I didn't know that events, the entire, breadth of things that you can do in the event world. And when I talked to our dean of academics at the time, she had said that events aren't a real career. And I was like, I think they might be. Did some research on my own, sent out my pink resumes all over New York City because all I knew that of planned events were weddings. So I ended up in New York a few days after graduation, planning like $1 million weddings in New York. Lasted about 6 months until I moved into tech on the corporate side of the house. Because once I got to New York City, got into events, I realized there's so many opportunities and options out there. So my first my first go was big time weddings. I moved into tech. I helped launch IBM's Watson all over the world. That was B2B tech that I did for about 10 years, and it was so fun. But it was a grind and it was a hustle. I had some life events happen and moved to the trade show side of the house. I started at Ziff Davis, went to CMP which then became UBM, which now was bought by Informa. So it's had many iterations, a lot of the same people. Moved to the trade show side of the business, doing C-Trade, Cruise Global, launching CPHI North America, which CPHI is one of the largest pharma events in the B2B business, amongst other portfolios, and kind of became a fixer. It was the land of misfit toys. So I wasn't really planning. I was doing strategy of like, how do we make more money? Because everything's broken. And then I left after like 7 years of doing that at UBM. right before the acquisition to go off on my own and consult for both sides of the house, for brands who were spending money on events like Visa, Coca-Cola, et cetera, whether it be internal events or their presence at trade shows, producing their own conferences, and then going in and kind of taking a look under the hood and consulting with big organizations like HIMSS at the time, who during COVID, they had a multi-million dollar event and portfolio that just kind of ceased to exist. So I did that for 6 years until my co-founder, Marco Ghiberti, who is very well known in the event industry, came to me and said, basically, we have this idea, we have this kind of an idea. Can you help us validate it? We already have the money raised. Do you want to launch it? And I said, hell yeah. And that became RacquetX a little over a year ago.
Wow, that is a swift journey through all your career. I noticed here
so many more ups and downs, but we'll save that for when I have a drink in my hand.
Sounds good. I know Marco's also been a guest on the podcast, so we've had a little bit from him. This was before RacquetX, so this is a little bit a while back. I noticed here on your resume, you were also on the advisory board of a metaverse company, the Surreal Events.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Early in COVID, when the metaverse became, and it was right at the beginning, it was Surreal Events had kind of pivoted very quickly. They had a platform on the Unreal Engine, and they were building some pretty neat stuff. So they brought me in from an experience standpoint. So I've trademarked and have a handful of methodologies on the experience side of the house that I speak and consult with. And they brought me in to basically think about the full cycle of one, how does this translate to business events? Two, what does the entire experience look like from where we start to where we finish, and how do we grow the platform? Now we know, I think the metaverse still exists and is real. They're still out there, but I wouldn't say that it really took off on the business side of the house. Because, and I've never not said this, you can't replace a handshake.
Sounds good. We like the handshakes. And you've also done quite a bit of teaching, I see here as well. There's Emory University and also Muhlenberg College?
Muhlenberg, which is where my alma mater. And it was my revenge that I said that after I got jobs in events that I wanted to teach. So I came up with a 10-week curriculum called the Experience Experiment. Pitched it to Muhlenberg and went every week teaching these kids. It was an application for a certificate program, 10 weeks. School gave them a budget, much like I had when I was there, a little bit different end result, not quite as big a budget. But every week I brought in someone who was very knowledgeable on one key area, whether it was budgeting, branding, marketing, operations, et cetera. We partnered with them and they produced an event for the student body at the end of the 10 weeks. And it's probably one of the most fun, rewarding, awesome things that I've done in my career. I moved to Atlanta during COVID and got involved in the Hatchery, which is Emory Center for Innovation. So it wasn't, it was very experience centric. And I still host workshops there for all of their students in their cohort, which is like it's a college level incubator for startups. So I kind of walk them through what it's like to think about experience, how do they launch events, branding, et cetera, and do that. So it's really fun and we should do more of it. I feel like events should be a whole degree.
Yep, I agree, and I've done some teaching myself, so I do think it's very rewarding. Yes, absolutely. I also noticed one thing here called Change the Stage, which I thought was super interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah, my heart. My heart hurts on this one. So beginning of COVID, I mean, I've always in events we hold a lot of I think power and influence. Maybe power is not the word, but definitely influence. And who we put on our stages, in my opinion, is who we deem as experts. And if we don't have a diverse set of voices, backgrounds, thought and opportunity to people, we're doing are the industries that we all serve a huge disservice. So in the early stages during a lot of the protests here in the US, I was looking at everything that was happening both online, and I went through some of the biggest events in the world and realized that it was pretty homogenous looking stage, not just on gender diversity, but all aspects of diversity. And I started, I don't know, I just made a statement, and it's still out there. I put it on LinkedIn. You could probably Google it. That I vowed that I would do everything that I can to try and influence organizations as a consultant to be better and to do better and to create some metrics behind it. We had a very hard time adopting that. Most companies and industries, while they supported it and signed a pledge, which was the background for it, it was really hard to get the metrics on whether we were moving the needle or not. Across the board from a corporate standpoint, I think a lot of organizations didn't want to admit where they were, which was part of the beginning stages of it, and they didn't know how exactly to move that needle in the different directions. So it became a little defunct after a couple of years of struggling to do it. But I try and live fully in that, and everyone that I work with, and I hope that the message at least lives on.
Absolutely. And we've covered a lot of initiatives around diversity on stage and off stage. So hopefully that's something that has contributed to positive change.
Yeah, we weren't looking to. I think that the issue was we weren't looking to fix all of the problems. I was looking to create awareness around the issues and then create tools for everyone to try and be better. But there are much more well-versed people on the diversity front at events. We're trying to highlight them and showcase events that were doing it really, really well. And we did that. And I think that we hopefully moved the needle a little bit.
Great. So when you talk to people that aren't involved in events, how do you explain to them what you do?
I make magic and we create connection. I think the way I've always described it, and what I realized I love the most about it is that it doesn't matter the medium. I plan a dinner party, which is one of my favorite things to do, whether it was a birthday party when I was a child or a corporate event today where we're creating business meetings and growth. It's all rooted in human connection. And I became not obsessive, but probably a step below that on the psychology of events, how the brain works, and what makes humans tick, and what helps create that connection. Not so much community, but the connection, which to me is the most important conduit to all of it. Because what we really want isn't just creating community; we want to create engagement as event and meeting organizers. So to me, I'm fascinated with how do you get two people to shake that hand, like I talked about earlier. So that's when I describe what I do. It's I get to help people make connections, whether it's to people to ideas, or people to businesses.
Interesting. You kind of differentiated between connection and engagement and community. Do you not see those as kind of complementary or connected, or are they quite different for you?
They're all connected, and I think what I think, in personal opinion, I think you need to have connection before you can have engagement. And I think people skip to wanting to force engagement before they've actually created the thing that gets them the thing that the common denominator in their humanity together that gets them to actually engage. So I think the creating moments of connection is really a big focus area that I think in this space kind of has got lost for a little bit when everyone was just it's about engagement. We like create communities, and it was just a whole bunch of people in a space together. But what's the thing that makes them tick? And it's not easy. It's very, very difficult. And I don't think a lot of places do it that well. But it's not as hard. It doesn't have to be as difficult and as complicated as people think. In my opinion, they overcomplicate this piece of it.
Do you feel that's because they're sort of, when they say community, what they really mean is a big list of emails that they can market to?
Yeah, I think they're lying to themselves of what they're trying. They've marketized and put a kind of polished up a business jargon and lingo. So yeah, and it's not my thing when I was in corporate America was that we were creating these moments and these experiences that were revenue centric. And I worked at publicly traded companies. We have shareholders, we have responsibilities. But at its core, we need to service the people who attend. Because if you don't have a satisfied audience, ticket holder, buyer, conference attendee, whatever that looks like, you don't get the money in year two. So there has to be a level of we really understand and care about what we're doing. And we may have to make investments or sacrifices on that side to serve this audience. But in the long run, we end up making a better impact, which therefore bigger dollars, in my opinion. And it's a short-term versus a long-term outlook on strategy.
Makes sense. Glad you brought that up. Glad we went there. So you talked already about.
Talk about that one. I'm very damaged. I could talk about that one all day long, but I just, I believe it. I do. I think if you really care about the people that you're serving, you do a much better job.
I love it. I have all the time in the world for that. I think that's a very useful conversation. You talked a lot about your career already, different kind of stages, different types of companies you've worked for. What about specific events? When you kind of want to tell a great story about an event to your friends and family, is there one event that comes to mind where you say that one was really amazing?
That I've planned or that
Yeah.
I've been
Well, that
involved
you've
in?
been part in.
Oh, yeah. There's a couple. I mean, RacquetX obviously is
We'll get
the
to that one.
newest,
I was thinking something
but
before.
exactly, like, yeah. I mean, that was my baby. There's one that I don't know why I go back to it. It's not. It's maybe it was cooler to me at the time, because it was new. I did an event for, see, it was APC, which is a data center. So pretty like not sexy industry in the tech side of the house. And what I really tried to do is like, how do you make some of this stuff fun? These tech events. Well, there's a lot of money to be spent. Having a breakfast at the Ritz Carlton isn't like the most interesting thing on the planet. So APC, and I want to say it was like IBM or somebody. I decided, I kind of asked them like, where are your coolest data centers? Like, what are you powering? And they're like, well, we do Epcot and Disney. And I was like, duh. Like, what could we do there? So we ended up being able to go to the underground data center that ran Epcot and Disney. We brought 10 key buyers, from their potential prospects and customers. We brought them to the data center, but it was before live broadcasting and webinars. It was still like during satellite truck days, in the early 2000s. We did like a Blair Witch project off the unprofessional, like, tour of the data center with all the noise and and we got to then broadcast that out to hundreds of different people that got to see the behind the scenes of the data center in Epcot. And while it's not like South by Southwest or something really cool, to me it was a pivotal moment in that you could reach a lot of different people in a really simple way. It didn't have to be the sexiest thing on the planet, but to this industry it was, and to the people that we were serving it was. And of course, then we did a big private dessert reception with fireworks at Epcot and whatnot. But for me, it was just the living on the edge of live broadcast in its early stages, in a pretty organic, non-television mode, that anything could go wrong, and a couple things did. But that it was like people got to see the thing that they had always wanted to see. So that was, to me, again, I think that was one of the coolest things that at its time. Now it's not maybe as cool, but at its time, I was like, yeah, pretty bad. This is pretty badass.
That sounds incredibly appropriate for the audience, so I'm sure it was well received.
But it was
So,
all about, it was just all about knowing who your buyer, like who's the audience you're trying to serve. And like, okay, like if that's the coolest thing that they can see, then just give it to them.
absolutely. So let's talk about RacquetX. You've
Mhm.
told us a little bit about the kind of start story. Was that the first time you've ever heard of RacquetX? Was a call from Marco?
Yeah, well, yeah, we named it together. He was like, "Hey, there's white space." So there are a handful of investors that he knows personally and is really good friends with that are all racket sport enthusiasts themselves, and they grew up playing and play together now. They're all from Argentina with him, and they said we want to launch some paddle clubs and an e-commerce site for racket sports, and we went to do some research to see where we show up at, and there's no event. So obviously, Marco being in that investor pool was like, well, we should just build it. But let's validate the proposition and see if this is some legs to it. And that's when we had been talking about, um, partnering somehow together, where I really wanted to go from consulting and telling people what to do and them doing like 10% of the things that I suggested to them, to me actually doing the thing that I've been preaching about for years.
And how did you go about
Yeah.
like validating it? Did you kind of research? How does that work?
Yeah, there was some initial research, but for me, it's always like talk to people, like get in the market, call the associations, talk to people at clubs, just get some firsthand knowledge of like what's needed, what's been done, what hasn't been done, are there things we're not thinking about? So we did that, but we didn't have a ton of time. We had less than a year to launch this, so there was a little bit of validation and a lot of like Hail Marrying it up into the sky, hoping that, to validate this along the way, as we went. And it turned out that there were an organization or two who had tried something like this, but they co-located, they didn't give it the attention that it needed, various different forms. The industries weren't ready to come together, but that maybe a neutral body, us who wasn't associated with the legacy of these sports, were able to do it. But it took a while for people to to say, oh, they're onto something here. Because when you're launching events, you're selling air. We have
Yeah.
nothing to show. You have nothing. There isn't even a picture. And there wasn't even a picture that exists of all the rackets together. We had to have AI. We worked really hard to get an AI to create the image that's on our website right now, because it didn't, unless when we styled some photo shoots, but that one ended up being the best. It didn't even exist because the industry was so fragmented within their sport, but they all have the same challenges.
So am I sensing that there's a sort of like tennis versus the rest, and tennis sort of is
pickleball here in the U.S. So pickleball has been on the rise in the U.S. It really picked up like right before COVID, during COVID, because it's accessible, fairly easy level of entry, skill play. You can play at any age,
Yep.
young or old. And what was happening was, it was just because of its popularity, tennis courts were being converted to pickleball courts, and thus the tennis purists became a little enraged, unhappy with the pickleball crowd. And it became a little bit of, and there still is a little bit of that rift, but I think what we're showing is that rising tides can lift all ships. And if you have a racket in one hand, you could have a paddle in another. Everyone needs to work on their sport, how they integrate together, and make it more accessible for everyone.
And so the sports that you're covering, it is tennis, pickleball, squash, paddle. What else?
Yeah, badminton, table tennis, ping pong,
Okay.
racquetball. There's beach tennis. And then there's a ton of variations of like paddle tennis and
Yeah.
platform tennis and lots of different things. But we're trying to incorporate as much as possible thoughtfully. This year it looks like we're going to be adding a racquetball court this year, but we built 9 courts last year: 4 pickleball, 1 full regulation size tennis court, and 4 paddle or padel courts. Depends on where in the world you're living. I say paddle, but everyone else in the U.S. seems to say padel. And we had a few ping pong or table tennis. We can't say ping pong. Table tennis tables. We had pros. It was B2B and B2C. So we were able to bring in pros, tournaments, exhibitions, just free play, you name it, for people to. And what was so cool was that like a pickleball pro who may have a really great following, like to see them on the paddle court, of which they've never played before, because there's probably 350 courts somewhere. It's less than 500 courts at this point. Haven't had access to one. So seeing them actually like, oh, this is really fun too, and see this crossover of these different sports was awesome for the entire industry to actually celebrate each other, and that you can't all play together.
So tell us a little bit about the event. What did it actually become when it actually went live?
Well, yeah, it morphed and changed, and I think the biggest lesson I had was iterate, and leave room to iterate. It was B2B and B2C. We didn't want to call it a trade show and conference because I don't, as a consumer, I don't think they want to go to, if you call it a trade show. I don't think a lot of people want to go to things when you call it a trade show right now. So we kind of festivalized it as much as we can, at least in year one, on a startup budget. But we had probably close to 50 conference sessions, if you will. But they were either, they weren't the things that compete with your associations. They were things like we brought in the Miami Heat and the Dolphins to talk about fan engagement and what they do as a large, very successful organizations. Everyone can learn from that. So the objective was that every session, regardless of where you came from, had to relate, and you had to tie this back to how all sports can kind of, or all, clubs, owners, or whatever that is, but that's how we're going to unify each other, is that there's a common message from everyone. So there were about, like I said, about 50 conference sessions in two different rooms. Everything was on the show floor and next to the show floor. We had about 86 brands represented. And then, like I said, the 9 courts. We designed this really big bar viewing area that we called the bar lounge viewing area. Organic networking happening. We had Grip as a matchmaking app, which was pretty successful. But people organically met and had this area where you got on courts, you played with different people, you can grab different paddles and rackets to try. And it was really something for everyone, in addition to actually being functional for business growth.
And how did you work on the marketing? Because obviously there was an interest there. You connected with the brands, etc. But you still have to find the attendees, right? You have to find did you just but are there lists of people, or did you work through partners?
I'm an anti-list buyer.
Of course.
But
how do you fill the event, right? Because you're setting this up, you're making all these promises to the suppliers and the sponsors, and how do you get people there?
We crushed it on partnerships and collaborations, because some I can't call partnerships officially, but we strategically placed and hosted the event during a time frame when we knew there would be enthusiasts in town. So we did it during the Miami Open tennis tournament. We created a supporting collaboration with them. I can't use the word partner because people pay lots of money to be a partner. We paid nothing, but we had a joint ticket sale with them, where if you bought certain tickets at the Miami Open, you had access to 3 days at RacquetX, as well as all RacquetX ticket holders of a certain level. It was included in your pass that you got a ticket. We also happenstance, but amazing things happen. We had a professional pickleball tournament in the convention center that we kind of orchestrated last minute. And they brought in thousands of people during the week that they were playing. They have amateurs and pros. So having that joint ticket in this free flowing of our attendees helped us on our opening numbers from a consumer standpoint as well. And then the B2B side, we formed a gazillion partnerships. And with the USTA, every association in every sport, there are, as we know, there's associations that plan meetings and everything. And they were all more than willing to collaborate with us and bring their members. Some of them co-located and co-hosted events in meeting spaces that we had. We offered the space to them because there wasn't anything like this. They were getting very granular on their content, and we were trying to be a little bit more high level. And that was something that they, either they couldn't do, don't have the budgets to do, or never really had access to do. So that is how we didn't email like our lists. We're building. We created a lot of content, so we blogged. And we created some research reports to validate that we knew what we were talking about. Because I don't know if I'd buy a ticket, several $100 ticket someplace, if I didn't know that these people knew what they were talking about. So we created some key pieces of research that didn't exist in the industry, unveiled research on site, and new research, proprietary on site, and made a lot of personal calls. And I got to be honest, we forged a lot of personal relationships. It was not just, there was no method. A couple of people have asked me, and I'm like, I wish I could say that it was like, do this, do this, do this. It was, I'm now your friend. Tell me everything you know. Invite everyone you know. It was a lot of hand-to-hand combat.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that with us. What were the final numbers that you achieved this year, just so we have a reference?
Yeah, we had about 10,000, my gosh, I wish 10,000. We had about 2,000 tickets sold and on-site with folks. We had, like I said, 86 partners and sponsors combined together in around 50 content sessions, I'd say. We also programmed, so depends on how you want to look at content, all 9 courts, we programmed every hour of all 9 courts for 3 days. So I consider that all content. It was demos, it was yoga for racket sport players, it was cardio tennis, it was pop things you've never heard, like pop tennis. We coordinated and planned all of that as well.
So that's not like a tournament, but it's actually planned things that are happening on those courts.
They were planned. Yeah. They were all planned activities that were either something very cool that was watchable, a lot of new technology that was showcased on the court that people can see, serve machines. There was one, a Tenny Bot, which is like a Roomba, like a robot vacuum, but it cleans up the tennis balls. Like we tried to load in as much cool stuff as we possibly could in year one to make it as engaging as possible.
Great. And last question, kind of technical or detailed question. The tickets, you mentioned kind of lots of different types of tickets. So like high level ticket gets you access to the Open, to the Miami Open. Could you kind of cover those a little bit for us?
Yeah. We've simplified it even more going into next year. We had a VIP pass. So like from a festival standpoint, We didn't, it was kind of like, how do you take an all conference pass, but make it interesting for everyone? So we did a VIP pass that had access to all content, but also we were able to partner and pull off some VIP events. We had a VIP lounge, gift bag with like a gifting suite type of area where people can kind of, take what they want. So there wasn't a ton of waste there. We had some really amazing partners and sponsors give some things for that. We had like an all access, which gave you just not the VIP piece, gave you everything else, access to sessions and the Miami Open, the pickleball tournament, etc. And then we did a expo, your expo only, where you get to come and walk around. That didn't include the Miami Open access, but you were able to upgrade from there. So we tried to keep it fairly simple. We did add some day passes in for all access at last minute, but I'm not sure it really moved the needle for us, to be honest. We're going to keep it really simple this year because we're going to make all 3 days killer that you're not going to want to miss.
For sure. And so if you're like more of a consumer, you would do the kind of just the normal pass, and
Yeah,
would
you
you
get an
have
expo
access?
pass.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they were really reasonable. It was like $25. So you could still bring. We had a kids' day. We opened up with kids' day on Sunday morning, and we wanted to be able to have a family come, family come and still be able to afford it. Get on courts, do some cool stuff, see things. But we're not naive that you're not going to be there for 3 days as a consumer. You're gonna come for a couple of hours. So we wanted to make sure that we had these really impactful moments for folks to spend their time where they felt like they got value.
Okay. And then they didn't have access to the sessions, right? The sessions for the B2B
Just the
folks.
show floor. We had a show floor session, but I wouldn't say that they went. They were. I'd say most consumers were either looking around at different apparel and equipment companies because people were actually selling goods on the show floor, as well as on the courts.
Makes sense. So
It was
what
really
about
cute to see. It was really cute to see like some like little kids on the court. Like there were dogs there. Like it was it was a real circus. But it was really awesome to see just like all ages, all skill levels, all different types of people from all over the world kind of come in and have fun.
Great. So tell us a little bit about learnings. What did you learn? You already mentioned a few things that you're going to be doing different this year. What are your kind of top learnings from the event?
The ability to iterate, I think, it's not something. It's not easy in events because you have to set a floor plan, or you're supposed to set a floor. But you're supposed to you have to plan the event before you know what the event really is when you're launching. And I tried really hard to leave as much space and room without seeming like we didn't know what we were doing. But the ability to, as we got to know what our needs were and what the audiences and our sponsors' needs were, that we can change. And we were very transparent about that, very transparent. We did not go in saying that we knew everything. We said that we are building this for the industry with you. And we changed some pretty important things. We changed some pricing along the way on our sponsorships. We changed our entire floor plan probably 4 or 5 times, which, in the trade show part of the world is not easy feat, but we decided that we were going to curate the show floor and the entire event. We were going to place everyone and they had to trust us in year one that we were going to put them in the best place possible for them. So that we had the ability, because we went from 3 courts to 9, we ended up adding, which is a big shift. So there's that. There's some very industry specific things that we learned. Court building is not like building anything else. There are separate rules, regulations. There are things that my team and I had to deal with that we never knew before. So I think the learning there is even more homework if you're trying to do something new. There were some unforeseeable fire marshal issues we had, and then I think it's a grind and a hustle. So I think the other thing is I would have hired slower and fired faster on team. Yeah, yeah, that's one thing I think a big learning that a lot of us can take away and we don't want to admit. But I made some great hires and I made some not so great hires.
Happens to us all, I think. And I think it's a challenge in the industry right now, I think, on the hiring side.
Yeah, especially when you're launching and it's not like we have huge budgets to compete with existing things that exist. You have to really be bought into and care about the industry and the value proposition that we have. And I think we're in an amazing place right now. But yeah, there were a lot of ups and downs, and that there is a limit. As a founder or someone who's leading the business, like there are only so many hours in a day and so many things that you can do, no matter how invincible you think you are. You have to be really realistic about what the limitations are.
Yeah, great advice. And so, okay, year one done and dusted, successful. What are your plans now for year two?
Yeah, year two, already off to the races. We want to double in size. So we want to double on the amount of sponsors and partners we have and the amount of attendees. So we are working really closely to create even more strategic relationships and partnerships now that we have a brand that's recognizable, trusted. I think we did the thing that we said we were going to do. Year ones are, and I've launched before, year ones are not easy and they're very, very difficult. I think year twos are even harder. There's a level of expectation now that people have to get from 2 to 3. So we are looking to create and just take it up a level. How can we continue to evangelize our mission of the unifying of all of these sports, and how do we make that come to life even more? And we have some things we're working on that I can't say yet, but we'll go live with them early fall. And but yeah, we're doubling down on what we did in year one.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing. Looking forward to hearing more about the new ideas and new
Are
concepts.
you a racket sport fan? Do you play?
Well, I have a padel court about 100 meters from my house. I've
Lucky
not
you.
played that much, but I'm definitely getting into it.
It's really fun. You gotta get into it, and then you gotta come to RacquetX.
Of course. Excellent. So let's zoom out a little bit. We've talked a lot about your career and RacquetX. I also want to get your kind of view on the industry and different challenges and things that are exciting.
Yeah.
First, I guess I'll ask the hard question, which is what keeps you up at night from a kind of industry perspective?
I mean, it's always about, from an event industry standpoint, I mean, we dealt with COVID. I don't know. I don't know if that keeps me up at night, but there's definitely some trauma uh, from putting all your eggs into a basket that could not happen if there's a major disaster, geopolitical issue, pandemic type of thing. So I do think that keeps me up a little bit as an owner, founder, where I'm invested in that. And I think I'd say the other thing is making sure that and I said it earlier, not saying outdo yourself, but you're only as good as your last event, always. So how are you staying on top of what's the most important, and where do you prioritize? Because everything's a priority. Your marketing, your this, your that. I get everything. It seems like a priority when you're in this type of position, and it can't be. So really, where does our money where should it be spent? That has the biggest impact for both short term and long term. So that keeps me up constantly. Is like, are we doing the right thing? Is this the right? Because we have to plan it, a little bit in advance. So you can't wait till the last minute to do everything. Iterating is cool, but there also has to be a plan.
That's great advice, I think. So what about things that you're excited about? Again, not necessarily specific to RacquetX, but just in the industry, developments, anything that's kind of really got you excited.
Yeah, I think I saw some pretty cool, whether they're innovations or not. I saw some interesting trade show booth builds that were pretty sustainable, reusable. We had a blow up booth. Actually, it was like it felt very bouncy house-esque, but really sleek and very cool. Portable, collapses up and goes to like very minimal stuff goes along with it. So I love that. And I love the innovation that's happening to try and make meetings and events more, eco-friendly and sustainable. And I love that everyone is a little more conscious of that, or at least trying to. So that makes me really excited. I think people always use the word. I think they use the word experiential very heavily and undeservingly. I'm not a fan of throwing something out there that makes no sense for the event that you're doing. I get that people love puppies, and I know I'm going to get flack for this, but like I get that people love puppies, but like bringing puppies, and it's amazing that they get adopted, and I think there's some really good there. But like if it doesn't have anything to do with what we're trying to accomplish here, I'm not. I don't think that's a huge experiential move, in my opinion. Just like I wasn't a big fan of like throw money at a huge name speaker that has nothing to do with your industry to sell more tickets. So I'm excited about to see where the industry starts to kind of take experience and how they look at it and what they do and how they create really meaningful moments for engagement for folks. So I'm excited because I think people are starting to have the right conversations rather than taking the easy route out on that. So more on that. And I guess the other thing that I'm excited about is that people in general are more bullish on going to events right now. I think we do have to level up our game. We have to provide a really amazing environment and atmosphere for folks, which is going to, like I said, bring the experience level up for everyone because it's not if you build it, they will come. You have to build something really great for them to get on a plane, buy a ticket, take time away from their families, their lives, et cetera, to do something for you. So again, I'm really excited to see where people start to take things because we have to be very intentional.
Have you been to any events recently that really inspired you that you went, hey, these guys are doing something really interesting?
I'm not the best person to ask this. I'm a pretty tough critic. I'm a very tough critic. I was at C2 last year, not this year. Literally all I've thought about is racket sports and RacquetX. The last 14 months of my life, but I did scoot out to C2. They do an event, little event incubator there. I think they do a really interesting job and think about things in different ways that you can extract from us from the industry, can get ideas from. But again, it's not applicable to all of our industries, but it makes you think. And I love events that kind of make you think. The one experience, whether I call it an event, I guess it's an event. The Overtime League, and I've written about this before. They're based here in Atlanta, but they've created it's a basketball league for high school students who are going to skip college to go straight to the NBA. And they're moving into other sports, but they've created this like ecosystem where they teach the player, they support the players, they get them through their GED. But they have built an arena here in Atlanta that is fully equipped for social. So there are cameras everywhere so that when they play a game, they get hundreds and hundreds of pieces of content for every player to then socially market themselves to get a contract with the NBA. And I think it's a very, very interesting concept of venue support, venue management, and where the future of that's going to be going, where there are ways to be socially, to have a social minded marketing mindset built into the venue that's happening. So I'm watching them. I don't think we're there yet in the event piece, but if somebody could crack the code, I think there's something really interesting with it all kind of right there. So to me, going to that was very fascinating to see like the whole progression of like content coming out of an actual event.
That's really fascinating. As somebody who used to work a lot in social media, I think, especially during the pandemic, we had this idea that venues were sort of transforming into these hybrids, for a lot of live streaming. And what I think you're saying there is this venue is not, I mean, I'm sure it can do live streaming if you want, but that's not really the focus. The focus is creating really good video content that then can be used by hundreds of different people.
Different angles. It's ways to support their players, and that's their audience. And I think that is it's a pretty neat thing. We should do a little offsite adventure to it. They could do a tour, but it's a really neat concept that they have, and I think we can learn a lot from people who are innovating in other spaces that have an audience format like we all do.
Yeah, fascinating, because I think it gives the basketball players even more reason to want to be part of this league, right? Because that gives them
You come in and it's like, you don't have to do it all yourself. Like there's teams of people who help you do this, and you're getting this professional footage that's pretty incredible.
Impressive. Anything kind of that you see changing majorly in events? And I'm thinking in the next 5-10 years, when you walk into an event in the future, is it going to look very different to the way it looks today? And let's take the good events as an example. So not the bad ones. Let's say the good ones. Do you think they're going to change a lot?
I've been talking about this forever. No one's done it yet. And I want to put it out into the universe because I either want somebody to do it or pull me into it. I've wanted to create like and I know it exists, like a more AI powered. So like imagine if you like walk into an event and there are your trigger points, but like you walk in and you hit, and I'm using my phone, you hit one of the triggers and like it's personal welcome. It's like, hey, Robyn, like so great to have you here. Here's what I think that you should experience while we're on site. Here, like if you head down to room 205, this is happening based on based on me as a Robyn Duda as an individual, having something AI based that actually pops up in my face, or that I can see and hear. I'm going to give you an example of how I've seen this applied elsewhere. But it gives me a unique experience, and tells me how to consume the thing that you're there. And I don't think it's that hard to do. Just no one's done it yet. So I'm begging for it. Like, how cool would it be like if I shot like the aisle sign at a show and it's like, these are the three, like, here are the couple of places you want to stop at based on what you're looking for, because we know you're looking for X, Y, and Z. And I say this because I was on the mural arts board in Philadelphia years ago, and we did a mural that had a custom music score by a famous composer, and they built an AI app that was attached to it, so that when you went through, you were able to hear the score. But also, it was in a historical area of Philly, that when you hit certain images, you saw, like, it was like an AI there was a pop out, and it told you the history, and there was like an actual the mural was telling you a physical story as you were. So it was this 4D event with it that I thought was but like the score change, it was very cool. And I think in events we can do some really, really cool stuff based on that.
Fascinating. I think it's a great example. I think we hear a lot of event technology companies say that that's all possible, but then, to actually put it into practice, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah. But I do think we have to start going. Somebody's going to do it. We have to start going toward, how do we personalize our experiences more using these technologies? And it's great that there's, like the technology we use for matchmaking is great, but like, there's a whole other layer that like we've just scratched. It's just the surface. I think we can do so much more.
Okay. And you've talked about a few things that are sort of things that you don't necessarily like about the industry or events, but if you could change one thing, if you had a sort of magic wand and you could kind of change one thing of maybe how the industry operates or something that we tend to do at events, what do you think that would be?
Oh gosh, there's a lot. One thing.
Well, we could cover a few,
No,
but
no,
but
no,
I'd like
no.
to.
I am most frustrated. I think it's not easy. And again, I'm talking big events like the trade show side. I think that it's not easy to launch. And in order for the industry to keep growing, we need to be able to launch things. And I don't think that business, um, the flexibility contracts, unions, food and beverage restrictions allow the industry to allow people like me or other people to launch as easily as they could. And there's these, you go into a big, you go into any conference center or convention center or big hotels, you have a lot of restrictions, and I think that they're not prohibiting. They're very prohibitive of the local economy, of smaller businesses. And I'm a fourth generation entrepreneur, and I want to be the advocate for small businesses as much as we can in whatever cities we go to. It's very, very difficult to do that in our industry. So I would like to change that, and the barrier to entry for people to launch.
Great.
Because if we don't launch more stuff, we don't have more. The industry doesn't grow.
Absolutely. I think they're both great points. And yeah, I think with the large companies running convention centers and a lot of the services, et cetera, it makes it quite hard to do that, right? So I think it's tough.
Very, very difficult. It's possible, but it's not easy, and it takes a lot of money. And I think maybe we might see, not everything has to be huge. Maybe we'd see some really awesome mid-size and smaller events if there was an easier barrier to entry.
Great. Well, Robyn, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. I have one last question, which is the last question that we wrap up our conversations with, which is, can you suggest someone that we would like to have on the podcast, or can you suggest a new guest for the Skiff Meetings podcast?
Yeah, it's an organization. There's two women, but I don't know if you've heard of Engage Summits, the wedding industry. I spoke at it. I've been familiar with it forever. The model and how they build meetings is fascinating. They're in the luxury wedding business. They charge $8,000 a ticket for people to go, which is the highest price that I've seen outside of your big Davos-y type of stuff. And I think that the two women who run that would be fascinating for you to speak to about how they've built their business and how they use FOMO to power their marketing.
I can see an excellent episode coming out of that as well. Robyn, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Best of luck with RacquetX. We'll definitely continue to follow the trajectory very closely. And yeah, thank you for being a great guest.
Thank you for having me on.